Good morning and welcome to Moments with Melinda. I am your host, Melinda Moulton. And today I welcome to my show, Christophe Courchesne. How are you, Christophe?
I- I'm doing wonderful, and it's so nice to be here.
So nice to be with you too. And I see you're sitting outside. Yeah,
Yes.
good for you. Good for you. Well, let me tell my viewers a little bit about you. Christophe Courchesne is the Associate Professor of Law and Director, Environmental Advocacy Clinic, the Associate Dean for Environmental Experiential Programs, Director of the Environmental Law Center at the Vermont Law and Graduate School. Um, and you have almost 2 decades of litigation expertise from the corporate, nonprofit, and governmental sectors. Is that correct?
Yes, absolutely. I've been in a few different types of positions.
But now you're recently just been promoted to the director of is it the Environmental Advocacy Clinic and also Associate Dean of Environmental Experiential Programs?
Yes, and I'm also sort of honored to take on the another role, which is sort of part of my associate dean role, which is the director of the Environmental Law Center, which is one of Vermont Law and Graduate School signature programs. It's sort of the hub for all of our wonderful environmental programs.
I mean, there's a lot on your shoulders. I mean,
It's a busy time for the law school and the graduate school, as well as in the world of environmental law overall. So yes, there is a lot going on.
it's really true. But you are a deeply impressive human being, and you have a very deep commitment to our environment, social, and climate justice. And we're grateful that you landed here in Vermont, um, and at the Vermont Law and Graduate School. And by the way, to my viewers, I don't know if you all know this, but the Vermont Law and Graduate School is one of the most prestigious and important law schools in the country for environmental law. I would say it is the most, wouldn't you say, Christophe?
Yes, our program has the sort of most course offerings, the richest variety of professors from across the world, really, and a signature summer program which has been around for decades that, attracts students and faculty and scholars who come to beautiful Vermont for a period of time during the summer to, share their learning, continue their work. There's lots of practitioners who join us as well. So it is definitely one of the country's great hubs for environmental law and has been since Vermont Line Graduate School's founding in the 70s.
That's right. Well, we're going to get into all of that, I promise you. But we're going to start at the beginning, Christophe. I want you to talk about your upbringing and who in your life inspired your life choices as you grew up.
Sure. Well, I grew up on the South Shore of Massachusetts, sort of in the Boston area, and I sort of had a couple of twin passions during that period of time. I was really excited and loved the outdoors. So I spent as much time outdoors as I could, enjoyed the many sort of walks in natural areas on the South Shore, really developed a real passion and a commitment to them. I spent some summers in the White Mountains in New Hampshire, where I'm doing some advocacy now, actually, um, and some summers as well. On the coast down on Cape Cod, out of the Cape Cod National Seashore, where one of our great public lands in New England. So I've had a really rich opportunity as a kid to enjoy those places, and have been watching them change. Simultaneously, I was really into language and literature, and loved reading, loved arguing about books, loved arguing about literature, and so as many people who enjoy the argument, and I found my way to law school ultimately, after a really awesome experience at UMass Amherst for college, where I studied English, and really wanted to move into the environmental space, and so that was what I focused on in law school, and that was sort of the genesis of my career. But those values, those environmental values, of caring about our public spaces and sort of treasuring them and protecting them for future generations was really part of the picture from very early on. Early on.
Indeed, you received your undergraduate degree, as you said, from UMass Amherst, and then you got your law degree at Harvard Law School. You then joined Goodwin Procter Law Firm in Boston. So talk to us about this time in your life. I'm not sure how old you are or what the world was like when you were down in Cambridge, but talk about this time in your life and fine-tuning your focus on our environment and especially the business approach to environmental issues. What year was that?
Well, I graduated from law school in 2004. And I think a lot of us who went to law school during that period, um, our experience and our perspectives were shaped by the post 9/11 period, where really the rule of law, justice, the role of lawyers in safeguarding our democracy was really front of mind for a lot of us. Um, but at the same time, what we were seeing was really, the Kyoto treaty had just been sort of established by out of the result of international climate negotiations, and climate change was becoming a major issue during that period. When I graduated, I did the very conventional thing of working for a judge at the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court as a way of getting training and learning litigation. And then, I was really eager to jump back into environmental law, which I'd focused on in law school. And this opportunity came up. I was really interested in doing public interest law right out of law school, as many of my students at Vermont Law and Graduate School end up doing. Um, at the time, there were not as many positions in environmental law as there are today, as I think there's been a burgeoning variety of different areas of environmental law in the last 20 years. But there weren't as many positions, but the private sector was a really important place for environmental law. This was the era of Superfund litigation over hazardous waste sites. A lot of people were fighting about these industrial areas that really needed care and support. And the private sector was doing a lot of that work through brownfields redevelopment. And it was an exciting time to be a lawyer trying to care about these places, bring them back to life. There was a lot of discussion about, bringing back urban places that had been neglected. And all that was very exciting to me and really struck me as important. Environmentalism for me was also not just about these beautiful places, but about the people who live everywhere, including in very dense urban areas, and who deserve the rights to green spaces and beautiful places to live. And so that was sort of a motivating factor for why I thought maybe the private sector would be a decent place to start my career. It's also great training. You learn how everyone thinks in the private sector. That's super helpful no matter where you end up. So I spent 6 years doing that, and it was really, really valuable to me, educational, both in terms of learning the law and how to work through the court system, understanding our regulatory agencies, the alphabet soup of, EPA, and in Vermont ANR and DEC, and sort of the whole range, and learning that and becoming conversant in that was really important. So I spent a lot of time in the private sector doing that, representing all manner of different types of clients, from small to large, largest corporations in the world down to the sort of local business person.
Sounded
And it was really great work. It was really great work.
fascinating. Well, I just want you to know that my son worked at Goodwin Procter too.
Oh, wonderful.
And he was a little,
Wonderful.
he was out of University of Virginia, and it might have even been around the same time. And I convinced him to come to Vermont because I felt he needed a healthy life.
Yes, and I will say that corporate law firm life that I experienced during that time is really hard. It is really long hours. It's unrelenting, and I was eager to try my hand at public interest law, which was sort of motivated me to go into this field in the first place, and that's sort of how I left.
Well, we have one of the best Vermont public interest research groups in the country. So what brought you to Vermont in the law school? I mean, you lead both the Environmental Law Center and the Environmental Advocacy Center. Talk to us about your goals and important programs that you're working on, and tell my viewers, what is experiential learning in your work?
Wonderful. I'm happy to talk about those things. The environmental, yeah, how I ended up here. Environmental environmental law, Vermont has a storied history, as I mentioned earlier, of being this hub for environmental law. Um, and I'd always been interested in teaching, and I'd worked a lot with law students and newer attorneys in my various roles. My most recent role before coming to Vermont was at the Massachusetts Attorney General's office, where I led, you know, 20 to 50 lawyers, depending on how you count it, and interns and all sorts of other professionals in our work during that period, which was during the Trump administration, first Trump administration, where we were fighting rollbacks of environmental protections. Our division filed litigation against ExxonMobil for climate deception. We were working on the Volkswagen clean diesel case on behalf of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Really rich variety of awesome work. And one thing that I felt was that I could use, more opportunity to interact with the next generation of lawyers, and also, the opportunity to sort of think hard about where we're going in this field. What should we focus on? How should we address these sort of existential challenges that we face, like climate change, like systemic injustice? And so, coming to a law school was very attractive. I had a wonderful connection with then Dean of the Maverick Lloyd School for the Environment, Jenny Rushlow, who's now back at Conservation Law Foundation. I had worked with her when I was at Conservation Law Foundation in my advocacy role, between being in the private sector and government sectors. And Jenny was a really strong advocate for and very persuasive. But I guess I didn't really need that much persuading. Vermont is a beautiful place. The law school,
Really.
it was a dream job in many senses. So I started at the law school working on um, purely in the environmental advocacy and justice clinics, and that was really natural for me because what we do in those clinics, and this goes to your question about experiential learning, we are putting students in the driver's seats of our cases. And that is incredibly important and exciting because very commonly early in legal careers, um, interns, early associates, they don't necessarily get the opportunity to sort of take a case, and work on all aspects of it, be asked about the strategy, the priorities, and working directly with clients. Those sorts of essential skills for new professionals are kind of in short supply in the way that we train lawyers as well as we put them into the profession. And so the clinics that we have at Vermont Law and Graduate School, including the two that I mentioned, the Environmental Advocacy Clinic and the Environmental Justice Clinic, where I also taught my first year, um, they're really about putting students who are, you know, into the deep end, right? Into the deep end, working directly with clients, figuring out what they need, researching the law, coming up with the first drafts of all manner of briefing, and in some instances being able to argue those cases in court. And that's just incredibly exciting for students, and it's invaluable experience. It's a huge leg up over their colleagues who don't have that experience. So I'm a real passionate advocate for experiential education, and especially in this mode of putting students in leadership roles really early on, because there's no substitute for having the case on your shoulders,
Right.
and not just playing a bit role. And so that's a very valuable transition that students need to make from being students to being professionals. And so that's something that we do in those clinics. I'll say that, that's a huge priority of mine at the Environmental Law Center, is making sure those programs are strong, have wonderful dockets for the students to take advantage of, that are really making, a difference in the world alongside teaching the students the basics, as well as some more advanced skills. So I really want those experiential programs to be strong. I think also we really have an incredible group of centers and clinics that are under my umbrella, under the Environmental Law Center, at Vermont Law and Graduate School, that cover all sorts of really important issues for states like Vermont, like sustainable agriculture, animal welfare, um, and the clean energy transition. And so we have a pretty big portfolio of issues and important important things to address. And we've got one of the best teams of faculty and staff addressing them, that is really anywhere in the country. So
You
it's
do.
really exciting to work with all of them.
Yes, you do. So I'm just, you're a Harvard alum, law school. You must have been proud of Harvard for standing up to the Trump administration. And has Vermont law received any pushback from the administration? And have any of your research grants been eliminated, or any of your grants in particular?
Well, we have one program that is on pause now that was focused on uh, U.S.-Asia partnerships for environmental law, and that has been a longstanding program at the school and had substantial federal support that was sort of abruptly terminated, like many of the other international programs sponsored by the State Department and USAID. Um, that, we weren't in the sort of driver's seat of challenging those efforts. A number of other entities are involved in litigation about those terminations. But we have that program on pause, and that's a real loss for our school and for Vermont. Um,
There's so much loss going on right now.
but I will say that one of our advantages as an institution is that we're an independent law and graduate school. I think which most people don't realize. A lot of people think we're affiliated with a university, and no, we have our standalone law school and graduate programs here in South Royalton, Vermont, and that's an advantage that we have over some larger institutions that are facing really, really severe cutbacks across all sorts of programs. Um, I'll say no one is immune from these pressures, including us. But I think that we are fortunate to have such a sort of diverse set of funders and a strong alumni support for our school and some pretty robust programs that don't rely on those types of funds. And so we're excited about the future. We have a lot of active programs. We've done a lot of um, hiring lately, at adding some members to our teams, and I think that's very exciting. We recently got a very substantial anonymous gift, which we talked about in the press earlier this year, to support our agriculture and animal welfare work, as well as some new work on aquaculture, which is an emerging important issue in environmental law. So
Ab-
we've got exciting pots on the fire that I think on the federal side, um, we're not a school like Harvard or
Mhm.
the UC system or Brown or Cornell or Columbia that has these really, really difficult sort of existential choices to make. But we're a school that's true to our values. We're a mission-oriented school. We've been focused on environmental values for decades and decades.
Well, we're going to talk
Um,
about your history
yeah.
a little bit here, but let me move on. We're halfway through my show. So, as you know, it was my generation back in the 1960s. I'm very proud of it, that fought for human rights, and we heralded in climate awareness. Bill McKibben has been out in front of this issue for decades, but look where we are, Christophe. I mean, how do we explain to our children where we are at this moment in history? The planet is raging, and we are the frogs in the steaming pot of water boiling. What do we say to our children?
Well, I feel very tortured about this issue, as you might imagine.
I wanted to bring it up. I
Having
want
worked on this my whole career, and having had substantial role in Massachusetts, which Massachusetts was the state um, that led the effort to challenge EPA's refusal to regulate greenhouse gases during the 2000s, culminating in the Supreme Court decision in Mass versus EPA that really heralded in the federal regulatory structure for greenhouse gas emission control, like the Clean Car Standards and other programs that had been gotten off the ground over the last decade or so. Um, and so it's crushing. We spent a lot of time at the AG's office seeking to advance those priorities and make sure those regulations, which our view, the law requires EPA to issue, would go into effect. And it's been very challenging.
So what do we tell
Um,
our kids? I mean, what are you telling your
I
students?
do. I have an 18-year-old and a
I was going to
16-year-old.
say, I mean, how, well, anyway, I'm sure and I'm going to keep moving on here, but I was just diagnosed with Lyme, and so many this year in Vermont are coming down with this tick-borne disease. And yet we do have an administration that does not recognize climate change. And they're doing everything to roll back the advances that you have made and so many of your colleagues over the past 50 years. So, as a lawyer, how can we fight against this if our democracy and our rule of law is literally getting the backhand smacked down by our federal government? The rule of law is not is really struggling right now. What do you have as a lawyer? Where do you,
I have kind of two different perspectives on this. One is that we shouldn't lose sight of the individual actions that we all can take um, within our states, within our local communities, to prepare for the climate crisis, which is really here with us, as you point out. It's a complete set of disasters that will affect society for decades and decades to come, no matter how quickly we reduce our emissions. There's a lot of really terrible outcomes that have been baked in through the emissions and the pollution that's already in the atmosphere. And so, what do we do on the local level? What do we do on the state level? Well, we support, you know, the best possible policies at every stage. So if your community is debating a flood resilience ordinance or bylaw, and you're concerned about this issue, make sure you show up to the planning board or to the select board to talk to your elected officials about this issue. One of the biggest problems that we face is that people don't talk about these things. And at the state level, it's so important, including in Vermont, which has seen, I think, a unfortunate uh, softening of our leadership position on climate, as I think there's been some misguided concerns about the affordability of transitioning away from fossil fuels, when in fact staying with fossil fuels is going to wreak enormous havoc, enormous costs, and somehow that gets lost in the conversation about a few dollars here and a few dollars there. Now, we shouldn't trivialize that. People are really dealing with a housing crisis in Vermont. People are really dealing with real public policy challenges around, human well-being. But in my view, there's no greater risk to human well-being than this crisis of the environment, probably the twin crises of climate and biodiversity loss. And certainly, if we don't take care of this place at the local and the state level, we won't have a lot to fight about at the national level. Now, we also have to keep our eyes on the ball as well, that nationally, this is a very difficult and challenging situation. And similarly, the most important sort of thing that I suggest to people is to talk about it as we're talking about it now. Talk about it with the neighbors that you may not think agree with you. Talk about it with your family, members of your family. Make it clear what your sort of perspective is on these challenges, because if you don't, there's a lot of peddlers of misinformation and sort of lies about the state of the world that are filling the void for many, many people and really polluting our political system.
absolutely.
So so those are the ways I would think about it. There's kind of the two sides of it, local action as well as making sure you're talking about these big picture issues.
Thank you so much, Christophe. Now, the school was established in 1972, which is the same year that Roe v. Wade was adopted, and also Earth Day. So that was a momentous year. The Environmental Law Center opened its doors in 1978 with 8 master's degree students. So you folks were way ahead of the curve. To my viewers, I want to send you to the Vermont Law School website. It's www.vermontlaw.edu. Please visit the site. It's a great website. And now I know that some of your funding comes from private donations. So to my viewers, we'd love it if you could make a donation to help support the work of the law school. So I wanted to ask you Christophe, whether Vermont Law and Graduate School, do you have a program focused on fighting for our democracy and against fascism? Because I feel like we're losing this battle. And it's truly the one last bastion of weaponry we have is our justice system and the rule of law. And I feel that it's at a breaking point as a lawyer. How do you feel about that, about how things are going?
Well, I certainly feel the concern, and I think it's shared across a number of members, lots of members of our faculty, and our student body and our staff. What I would say is that one of the most busiest places at the law school this summer has been our Center for Justice Reform Clinic, which is under my purview in the Experiential program, where we have students working alongside Director Brett Stokes, who has been, leading the charge, alongside lots of community organizations and others to protect, our immigrant neighbors here in Vermont from the sort of unlawful actions that the administration has taken, with respect to detention and removal. And that type of work is incredibly difficult, incredibly uphill under our federal immigration laws, but they have been working night and day to help Vermonters deal with this challenge. So that's a very concrete, what I would call sort of mutual aid that the law school has been engaged with. I think in addition, our colleagues across the law school are advising sort of businesses, nonprofits, just individuals about their legal sort of risks under the current circumstances. And that's really important too, because I think one of the worst things that could happen is that people are gripped with fear, and don't realize that they do have options, they do have rights. We have not lost the justice system in this country. It is maybe on in some measure of jeopardy, but it's still functioning. Our judges, our sort of brave federal judges here in New England, have been among the vanguard nationally in terms of protecting our rights as well as enforcing the requirements of federal law. These are really, really important things, and our law school faculty and students who are involved in our clinics may not be on all the front lines of all the issues, but I certainly agree with you that this is a really, really
Um,
difficult time, and we're really right there in the mix.
and we're really so glad you are. Now, I once asked Bill McKibben why climate folks never seem to talk about population growth, because I believe it's a contributing factor to the climate crisis. And environmental leaders are not often outspoken in support of reproductive freedom, or isn't there a deep correlation to our planet crisis and the need for reproductive freedom and control of our population?
Well, it's a great question, and it's a complicated history of that issue, as you may know. When I was in college, I was actually working with a wonderful organizer, um, uh, who was working with the Sierra Club, working on issues about women's reproductive rights in the developing world and in the global South. And it was a really important environmental issue to the Sierra Club and to her. Um, it's very important that we focus on human autonomy, and exactly those issues. And to me, those are the values that are really important and very, very much consistent with our environmental goals. I think that there's a thorny history of the population growth issue that we've studied a lot and we think about in the context of environmental justice at the law school in a lot of different contexts. But there is no question that uh, we should focus both on the environmental challenges facing the global South and how additional human autonomy, autonomy for women and families is so important to meeting those goals, while also recognizing that the the massive lion's share of the environmental burden that the globe faces is coming from the developed world and the industrialized economies of the world, and that those burdens really justify a really strong emphasis on climate justice and environmental justice, such that the global South doesn't have to bear all the burdens of this big transition that we're about to engage in, and that they also, get to enjoy the sort of the benefits of modernity, and all of those amenities that many of us take for granted here in industrialized societies. So all of that's true. It's a complicated issue, but
It, it,
it really was where I got my start, was thinking about reproductive rights in the environmental context, and it remains a really important issue, and I think there's a lot of common cause.
Good for you. Did you? And I just wanted to note that in Paul Hawken's book, The 100 Things You Can Do to Save the Planet, I think like the top five, one of the top five was to educate girls. So
Hmm.
I noticed that 25% of Vermont law and graduate school students are people of color, and
Yes.
67% of your students are female. So that's
Yes.
so much about the caring and heart of your school, and I was just deeply moved by these numbers. Um, so Christophe, as we come to the end of the show, I want you to talk a little bit about where we are right now on this planet. And I'm being very sincere here. I'm not being glib, but I wonder how many years we have as a human race. Because I believe as a species, we pooped all over our home and the powers that be are going to evict us. So, how many years do you think we have as human beings if we continue on the trajectory that we live on in? Who knows?
It's a great, probably unknowable question.
I I'm not
We
so
definitely
sure.
know, that a lot of the systems that support life are at significant risk. And uh, Many of them have proven more resilient than originally expected when we started thinking about this issue 50 years ago in earnest, and some of them have been, surprisingly resilient. That being said, there are limits to growth. I certainly believe that, and I think looking to technology to save us every single time is not a viable solution to all of our challenges. So, um, really, the answer to your question is that the sort of viability of these systems depend entirely on choices we are making today in terms of policies that we adopt, changes in our you know sort of changes in the systems that support us. If we can transition from fossil fuels, if we can develop cleaner and more efficient ways of living, in the environment, and if we can really support the development of the global South in a way that's equitable and sustainable, I think we have a bright future as a species and as a civilization. Um, but there are some pretty significant risks, and we're not addressing them anywhere near fast enough now.
I was going to say, don't you think that exponentially things are starting to sort of kick
We
back?
are seeing interesting feedback loops in various natural systems, and the science is really increasingly calling that out. And one of the things that's really been interesting to me is that the economic risks of the status quo are incredibly enormous and are wildly discounted in the way that our sort of way of accounting for those risks has evolved. So we are not thinking about the fact that modest changes we make today, even if having an immediate short-term cost, can result in saving tens of millions of lives later in future generations. And, you know, just if you look at particulate pollution alone, if we reduce that pollution coming from diesel cars and trucks and industrial sources around the world, the human health benefits of that to future generations are absolutely enormous. But they're
The-
very commonly not considered in our policymaking process or discussed in the halls of Congress or even in our state houses. And it's so,
Absolutely.
so important.
Did you hear about the new plastic that the Japanese have created that dissolves in, I mean, there's great stuff out there. I mean, there is, but my worry is that things are, but anyway, I'm an old lady, and I have grandkids, and I worry about our children. But so what do you want to leave us with today, as we go on with our lives, trying to make sense of where we as Americans can make a difference in a country that is in chaos? And I want to add one thing: Bernie Sanders told the board of VBSR about 25 years ago. He said, "I want to see a solar panel on every house in this country," and I mean, why isn't there? Why is Florida like the last state to have the least amount of solar panels? I mean, it's all really policy and politics. So it does come down to really who you vote for and what you care about, right?
I think that's very, very smart. I mean, I think that power is sort of often neglected as a study of power is really important. And one thing that I've noticed is that there are major institutional players that are very much more concerned about the next quarter, um, you know, sort of the
Jobs
next,
report, jobs report.
and the next election. And I've often thought that we need to be thinking about, those generations in the future much more commonly and much more intensely as we think about choices we make today. And so, to me, that's the challenge, and I challenge folks to think about how that plays out in your own backyard, and in the choices that you're making in your lives. But more importantly, um, you know, where we go as a country, and who and how we build power to make the changes we need to make. Because if we neglect that task,
Mhm.
and we, as many lawyers do, just enjoy the argument, which is unfortunately where we've been, where there's been a lot of entertainment around politics as opposed to serious consideration of how we move forward. If we can build power, I'm confident that the you know the better angels of our nature will prevail, as they have in other moments in history. But there's no question that this is a big challenge at the moment. Um, it really boils down to working with your neighbors, and working with your various communities, whether they're stretched across the world or whether they're right nearby, um, on building solutions, small scale, large scale, and devoting yourself to that. And
So,
you can do that. You can do that in any walk of life or any arena.
so how do my viewers reach out to the Vermont Law and Graduate School to, I mean, it's a college, so it's for the students and the faculty, but how do the people of Vermont access the college to,
Yeah.
yeah, how do they integrate into the college to find this strength and power?
Well, I'd certainly encourage everyone that's interested in our work to do as you say and look at our website. We have a number of community events that take place. Something that I wanted to plug, potentially, that might be of interest to your viewers, is that over the last decade or so, we've had um, uh, 15 to 16 lectures every summer by leading experts on environmental and related issues, and we call it the Hot Topics lecture series. Um, and if you go to the Environmental Law Center page on the Vermont Law and Graduate School site, and you can Google that to get there quickly, we have all of those talks archived over the last decade. So, lots of really great content from some of the leading experts in the world on these issues, right at your fingertips. And, in terms of participating in the school, certainly check out our events calendar, join us for things that are marked as public. Um, and stay in touch. Stay in touch with our clinics. If you have a legal concern or a need, our contact information is there. And we'd love to hear from you and with your ideas, and love to welcome you into our community in all the ways that make sense.
Thank you so much. Well, Christophe Courchesne, I want to thank you so much for being with me today. And I want to say that Vermont Law and Graduate School deserves our thanks and our gratitude for being on the forefront of the social and climate justice movement. And I hope everyone who works and studies there and all of your graduates know that we are deeply grateful to all of you and that we thank you for your hard work.
Thank you so much. This was a lovely conversation.
Thank you, Christophe, and thank you so much for being with me today. And to my viewers, again, visit the website, Vermont Law and Graduate School, Google it, and learn more about this organization and get engaged and keep the faith. All right, we'll see you next time. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.